I'm going to talk to you this evening about a problem that has been the most important, probably single thing for me to understand in my own life in the last 10 or 15 years, and that is the problem of shame. 15 years ago, I knew the word shame, but I had no idea that the major problem in my life was focused on the problem of shame. Because my belief is that until we understand toxic shame and how shame is internalized and moves from being a feeling, which it is, a healthy feeling, there's a healthy sense of shame, we'll talk about that in a minute, to being a toxic state of being, so that we can say that a person is shame-based, or they have a shame-based identity, that when that happens, that core of a person's life becomes so painful to bear that the person must develop defenses, must develop a false self. And those of you who watch the series, Bradshaw on the Family, I talked about the soul murder, the lost self, and that this is the great tragedy, the tragedy that Leon Blois talked about, that we're not saints. That is, that we're not the whole people we were meant to be. We come into this world precious children who are just full of life and love and spontaneity, and anytime you see a child comes in a room, the sourest person will beam. Children are beautiful, they're innocent, and you and I were innocent children. And so how does it happen that you can come into this world and be a wonderful, precious child of God, a precious little person full of spontaneity? What you see is what you get, no pretense. Remember Christopher Marley's poem, that children, the greatest poem ever told is one all poets have outgrown, the poetry innate untold of being only 4 years old. Born comrade of bird, beast, and tree, and unself-conscious as the bee. Elate explorer of each sense, without dismay, without pretense. In your transparent eyes there is no conscience, no surprise. Life's queer conundrums you accept, your strange divinity still kept. And life that sets all things in rhyme may make you poet too in time, but there were days, O tender elf, when you were poetry itself. That's that poem of Christopher Marley that Buckminster Fuller loves to quote, that every one of us were creative artists. Every one of us had this wonderful, feeling, vital, spontaneous life. And something happened. Some people might call it original sin, but something happened originally or very early on to a lot of us, so that we lost that spontaneity. We lost that kind of verve and enthusiasm. I mean, there's nothing more tragic than to watch a child who's had the life beaten out of them, or who has been scared so badly with emotional battering that they're all uptight and they've withdrawn, and they can see the depression in the child. So how does it happen that a child is born and has all this preciousness and this goodness, and then by a certain point of life, they're shame-based, they feel rotten about themselves, their core belief about themselves is that I'm flawed and defective as a human being. Now, every addict, no matter what the addiction is, has that core belief. If it's eating disorders, whatever the eating disorder is, if it's violence, if it's criminality, the addiction to violence, the addiction to power, workaholism, rage addiction, all the addictions that I've been talking about, whatever the addiction is, it's going to be rooted in toxic shame. It's going to be rooted in toxic shame. The core belief that I'm flawed and defective as a human being. Now I like to differentiate shame from guilt, toxic shame. Remember, there's a healthy shame. It's a very early developmental stage, the second developmental stage. After a child develops a sense of trust that is greater than a sense of mistrust, a kind of a core of hope that the facts are friendly, that the world is trustworthy, that this is the infant's needs, to have somebody there who basically takes care of your needs when you need them. Oh, you may have to cry for a little while. They may not always be right there with the bottle or whatever, but they'll be there. They'll be there for you. See, when a child has that, he or she develops a basic sense of trust. Now, it is only with a basic sense of trust that you could develop a sense of shame, because you have to have an interpersonal bridge. There has to be, so you can't be shamed by somebody that you don't care anything about. If somebody at your office tomorrow called you a name, or Monday called you a name that you didn't give a hoot about, that's not going to send you into, deep depression. Just say, that's old so-and-so, and who are they, or you may have something choice to say about them. But the point is, you've got to have an interpersonal relationship in order to have shame. So the second developmental stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt, where a little kid begins to learn to say no. See, the time to learn to say no is about age 2. Now, we're real behind. I believe in the campaign. I think it's a good campaign, the Just Say No campaign. But if you're already an addict, what you can't do is say no. Because what defines addiction is to be out of control. If you're an addict, what you can't do is say no. That's why you're an addict. And if you could control it, you wouldn't be an addict. So the definition of addiction is you can't say no. Now, if the Just Say No campaign is a preventive thing, that's fine. And I think it's, I'm not trying to put it down. It's better than nothing. But I think the problem is much, much more complicated. And I think that it's beginning at about age 2 as a child begins to separate the terrific twos when their name is no, no, and don't. When it's like, see, they start testing. They start separating and testing. And this is a time where it's so dangerous to get shamed, because they're eating stuff and trying out stuff, and they're learning to hold on and let go. Potty training, they're learning to hold on and let go, and it's a very confusing time, because sometimes you get rewarded for holding on, like in Foley's, and sometimes you get punished for holding on, like in the potty. Sometimes you get rewarded for letting go, like in the potty, but you get punished for letting go, like in Foley's. Okay? So it's a very confusing time. It's a time of musculature, holding on and letting go. A child needs to separate, but they need the parent to be there. It's like if you watch a little 2-year-old, he'll say, let me do it. And he'll start doing it, but he starts looking out of the corner of his eye to be sure you're there. And if you go in another room, he'll follow you into the other room. And so you see, in that process of separation, we need our parents to be there. So as a child separates, he does need structure. He needs what we call discipline, some kind of structure, because he's into his majesty the baby, Freud said. He's very impulsive and prone to temper tantrums. And the danger is over-coercing the child or over-punishing a child. Somehow it's very difficult to find this middle line. And it's what I've been saying all over the country now. The hardest job anyone will ever do is be a parent.